Good evening, and welcome to the first Exploring Space lecture of 2026. As always, we're excited to bring you a series of lectures that will explore topics in planetary and space science. And I'm Matt Schindel. I'm the curator of planetary science and exploration here at the museum, and also co-host of the museum's Airspace podcast. Thank you for coming out tonight. This year is the 50th birthday of our museum, the building here on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. That's right. And for the next 4 months, we'll be taking inspiration from the gravity-defying technologies that are featured in our newly reopened Milestones of Flight hall downstairs. Tonight, our discussion is going to be inspired by 2 messages sent into space on board historic spacecraft: the interstellar postcard, known as the Pioneer 10 and 11 plaque, which includes the pulsar map that's reproduced in the new terrazzo floor downstairs in Milestones, and the Voyager Golden Record that's currently flying aboard the Voyager 1 and 2 spacecraft, now the farthest traveled human-built objects to leave our solar system. We have 2 remarkable guests with us here tonight to discuss Pioneer, Voyager, the messages that we continue to send into space, and our ongoing quest to understand our place in the universe. Before I introduce our guests, though, I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsors who make this lecture series possible. So thank you to L3Harris Technologies and United Launch Alliance. Our guests tonight are Ann Druyan and Nadia Drake. Ann Druyan is an Emmy and Peabody Award-winning writer, director, producer, who was the creative director of NASA's Voyager Interstellar Message. She wrote Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, 6 New York Times bestsellers, and co-created the motion picture Contact with Carl Sagan. Druyan wrote, directed, and produced Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, and Cosmos, Possible Worlds, and she's currently at work on 2 feature films. Nadia Drake is an award-winning science journalist who specializes in covering space exploration and the search for life beyond Earth. For many years, she was a contributing writer with National Geographic. She's written for numerous publications, including Nature, the New York Times, Science News, and Scientific American, and she's working on a book now about looking for life beyond Earth. There's a lot more that I can say about both Ann and Nadia and all that they've accomplished, and we're going to have an opportunity to dive into that during our discussion this evening. But before we begin tonight's program, we wanted to take a moment to highlight the museum's 50-year anniversary.
This beautiful new museum and its exciting exhibits of the mastery of air and space is a perfect birthday present from the American people to themselves.
In 1976, we opened our doors on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., taking our visitors on a journey through the sky and out into space.
Shall we touch a piece of the moon?
For the last 50 years, we have welcomed hundreds of millions through our doors, conserved, restored, and safeguarded priceless artifacts, brought history makers to you, opened new exhibitions, acquired new artifacts to document the past, present, and future of aerospace, and helped inspire a new generation of innovators and explorers. The last 50 years have been incredible. We cannot wait to see what the next 50 years hold.
So Ann and Nadia, thank you both for being here. It's a real honor to have you both here. You were both, have such a great connection to the artifacts that inspired tonight's discussion. And I thought we might start by having you tell us, what are the Pioneer Plaque and the Voyager Golden Record, and how are you connected to them?
I can start. So the Pioneer plaque and Voyager Golden Record are both messages that are riding aboard spacecraft that are destined to be or already are in interstellar space. And the Pioneer plaques were actually put on the first two spacecraft that we knew were going to be leaving the solar system as a representation of what we thought we might be able to say to any beings that may intercept those spacecraft. Voyager records are similar. My connection with both projects is familial. My father, Frank Drake, played a role in designing both the Pioneer plaque and the Voyager Golden Record, and my mother's voice is actually aboard the Voyager Golden Record as well. And professionally, as a journalist, I've covered Voyager mission for as long as I've been a journalist, as the spacecraft actually crossed the heliopause and entered interstellar space. And now looking forward to one light day away for Voyager 1, as well as next year's 50th anniversary. Just one quick question before I pass it over to you, but how many of you were not born in 1977? How many of you have been born since then? Yeah, okay. So I like to think that, like me, you all are children of the Voyager era as well, in the sense that we have never experienced a single day on Earth without the Voyagers in our sky, relaying information back home about what it's like to traverse those distances and learn something new every day.
Well, it was my astonishing good fortune to know Carl Sagan and to have been asked by him to be the creative director of the record, the Golden Record, the Voyager Interstellar Message. And I remember vividly that time in very early 1977 when Carl first told me and Timothy Ferris, who ended up being the producer of the record, that NASA was about to mount the first reconnaissance of the outer solar system, and that upon completing its mission, the two Voyagers would depart from our solar system for perhaps 5 billion with a B, 5 billion years, circumnavigating the Milky Way galaxy. And I remember the goosebumps that I had that night and that I still have every time I think about this, when Carl asked us to create this record, this message consisting of greetings, music, images of our planet, and a sound essay, which would use the microphone as a kind of camera for life on Earth. And I remember when Carl told me this, I looked at him and I said, you're asking us to create a Noah's Ark of human culture that could very well not only last beyond the life of our own planet, but perhaps beyond our own star. And so that was the beginning in 1977 of a thrilling experience in gathering these pieces of music and sounds and greetings. And remember that we were using 59 human languages, including Sumerian, languages that were long dead, but also the greetings of the humpback whales and cricket song, and what we hoped would be a true representation of life on Earth.
We can enjoy maybe some of the images and the audio
Hello
now.
from the children of planet Earth.
And may I say that last greeting,
تحياتنا للأصدقاء في النجوم يا ليت يجمعنا الزمان.
That was my mother speaking the greeting in Arabic, which roughly translates to, "Greetings to our friends in the stars. We hope that we will meet you someday."
and that beautiful child's voice is Nick Sagan, age 7 years old. And every time I hear that, I think how redolent with goodness and hope that voice really is.
So let's ask the why question. Why did NASA agree to send these messages into space? And for you and Carl and for Frank, what did they imagine was the audience, or who did they imagine was the audience for these, the postcard and the record?
Well, there are always two audiences. One, of course, was the putative extraterrestrials of whom we all dreamed. And so the message was very much designed with them in mind. But at the same time, we were also thinking about the terrestrial audience, about the people of Earth, about how we could best represent not just the imperial voice of the people who built the spacecraft, but also of all the people on this planet, to represent the world's great musical traditions, and to do it with humility and a sense of our pride in how diverse and how magnificent our human cultural history was.
And Nadia, your father, Frank Drake, was one of the founders of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence here in the United States, and gave us the famous Drake equation, which is turning 65 this year. It has an anniversary of its own. But tell us a little bit about his early experiments and why was he so motivated to search for intelligence in the galaxy? And then a follow-up to that, why did he feel like it was appropriate to give directions to our home planet? Did he assume that all life in the universe would be friendly?
Oh, there's a lot to unpack in there. Let's start with the beginnings of SETI, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. How many of you are aware of what that is already? I imagine quite a few of you. Loosely translated, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence now means the search for alien technologies, signs of alien hardware, alien civilizations, however they happen to present themselves, however we happen to detect them. Dad conducted the first scientific SETI search in 1960. He called it Project Ozma. And he'd actually been thinking about whether we were alone in the universe since he was a kid, and he was growing up in Chicago in the 1930s. And his dad happened to mention that there were other worlds out there. My grandfather meant the other planets in the solar system, but Dad was 6 or 8 years old, and he thought that meant other planets like Earth that may have civilizations like ours, and he started wondering if he could figure out how to find them. And in 1960, you can actually, if you go back to that photo for a minute, that's the telescope that he used to try and search for any distinctly artificial radio transmissions coming from planets that may be orbiting two nearby sun-like stars, called Tau Ceti, which plays a major role in Project Hail Mary, if any of you have, yes, read the book or seen the movie, and Epsilon Eridani. And these are two stars that are like our sun, and he'd reasoned that if they had planets in orbit around them, as our sun does, and if those planets were anything like Earth with civilizations that were anything like ours, then that telescope would be capable of detecting any radio transmissions coming from them if they were at least as strong as what Earth produces. So that's what he did in 1960, and he didn't find any evidence for alien civilizations, or we would know about it. We would be on a different trajectory at this point. And that ended up producing a lot of interest in the search, which led to a meeting the next year where the Drake equation emerged. And one of the people who attended that meeting was a young graduate student named Carl Sagan. And during that meeting, Dad used the Drake equation as a way to set the agenda for the meeting, and we can talk about that later if you want to. But I want to get to your last point, which is your last question, which is why did it seem like a good idea to tell aliens where we were? And maybe we should unpack that a little bit. I'm also wary of talking too long. But when you came into the museum, you may have noticed that on the floor of the museum in that gorgeous entry hall, there's actually a map that points to Earth, both in space and in time. I'm curious, actually, how many of you did notice that? Okay, so if you didn't, when you leave, before you head back downstairs, pause up here in the gallery and just take a look at what's there, or pause in the gallery, wherever we are right now. Which floor are we on? And what you'll see is this. It's the pulsar map. It uses pulsars, which are the rapidly rotating corpses of stars that were once much larger than our sun, as signposts to point the way back to Earth, both in space and in time. And this image is aboard both Pioneer plaques and the Voyager Golden Record, with the idea being that if any civilization is adept enough to intercept one of those spacecraft, which is highly unlikely, but if they are, then they probably know something about radio astronomy, they probably know something about pulsars and quantum mechanics, which is how you decode this entire message, and they can probably figure out what it's pointing to, which is home.
Before I ask the
May
next...
I just add one
Oh,
thing
yeah,
to
of
that?
course.
And that is, I just wanted to add, that was great. I just wanted to add that, my view of the extraterrestrials, and I believe Carl felt the same way, was beautiful until proven ugly. And the idea that there could be spacefaring civilizations that could have mastered the huge challenge of traveling on interstellar distances in space, and they would still be looking for lunch, is very unlikely. It's counterintuitive, really. And so instead of just thinking of the extraterrestrials as a projection of our own human frailties, our greed, our hunger, our dominance hierarchies, our need to dominate, to conquer, our search for real estate, it seemed more sensible to, I think, both Frank and Carl to imagine beings who had been through their own technological adolescence, who had somehow matured beyond that. And really, when you look at space and you see how largely empty it is, isn't it those diamonds of consciousness, of awareness, that are worth far more than gold? And so that was, I think, part of their motivation, and I think it really holds up very well.
Wonderful. Before I ask the next question, I want to remind our online viewers that if you have any questions for the speakers, please drop them in the chat, and we'll try to answer a few during the Q&A following our moderated discussion. And also here in the audience, if you use the QR code that's on the slide behind me, you can submit your questions as well, so that we can include those during the Q&A. So picking up on what you both were just saying, and Anne, I liked how you put it, I think it was beautiful until proven ugly. The album itself, the Interstellar Message, the Voyager Golden Record, really does seem like an attempt to put our best foot forward as a species. Why is it so positive? Why doesn't it include, this is actually a question that Nadia had earlier, why doesn't it include more of the gritty elements of life on Earth?
Well, that was probably the most dramatic debate that we had. And in fact, we had it here in Washington, D.C., at the Smithsonian, an all-night session. That day, we came here to this very room. Carl and Timothy Ferris, who was the producer, and Linda Salzman-Sagan, who worked on the greetings, who arranged the greetings, and some of the other people, the composers, musicians, ethnomusicologists who we consulted, came here to see the IMAX film To Fly in the newly opened, magnificent National Air and Space Museum. And what kept us up all night was the question, do we show the Belgian Congo? Do we show Auschwitz? Do we show Cambodia? Do we show Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And I remember that Carl said, well, I don't know about you, but when I meet someone for the first time, I don't tell them horror stories about my family. I don't tell them, because that's unseemly. Usually it's kind of I keep it light for that first meeting. And of course, this would be our first meeting, theoretically, if anyone ever were able to intercept one of the Voyagers. And so he was very much of the opinion we should put our best foot forward. And very wisely, he said, he was imagining an interstellar spacecraft. And they haul in derelict spacecraft all the time from fledgling civilizations. The galaxy might be littered with them. And somebody who's probably a graduate student, is tasked with the idea of analyzing these messages. It's a little bit like the last shot of Raiders of the Lost Ark, that huge kind of collection of artifacts. And he was saying that the spacecraft itself would speak volumes about at what stage of our technological development we were at when we sent it. And so he was saying we don't need to show them how sordid and cruel and depraved we can be. Let's show them ourselves at our best moments. And I agreed with him. One of the reasons the subject came up was because I had found the earliest recording ever made of a battle. And I listened to it, and it was so banal and so heartbreaking that I myself didn't really want it on the record. But at a later time, before we finished the record, I was able to meditate at New York University in Manhattan while I was hooked up to, so that my electroencephalogram and my electrocardiogram were recorded for an hour while I meditated about our situation, our history, who we are. And it was compressed into a tiny bit of sound. And I must confess that I allowed myself to think about our plight. Remember that that the Earth was hooked up to some 60,000 nuclear weapons at that moment. More than half the world's scientists were working on weapons of mass destruction. And how could I leave that out? Because that was our predicament. And we hoped that we would endure and get through this adolescence, as so many people have, myself included, gone from a chaotic period in my life where I became a citizen afterwards. And the idea was maybe we could do that too.
So, Nadia, you and I talked about this earlier, but that the sort of ambitions of the Voyager mission were very large. And one of the things I think the mission kind of asks us to understand, though, is our own smallness, right, in the vastness of the universe. And as you pointed out, in November, after 50 years, traveling 38,000 miles per hour through space, Voyager will be only one light day away from Earth. And for comparison, Proxima Centauri, the nearest star to us, is 4.5 light years from us. So, yes, it's an interstellar mission in that it has left our solar system, but there's a lot of space between stars. I mean, how do you, frame the sort of scale of the galaxy or the universe versus the scale of the human life?
Yeah, so it took nearly 50 years, or it will take nearly 50 years for Voyager 1 to be one light day away. And again, that just is the amount of space that light covers in 24 hours, traveling, as the name implies, at light speed. It's almost unfathomable to me to think about that our most far-flung creation, which, as I said, has been a fixture of the cosmos since before I was born, I haven't known a sky without it, is only one light day away. And of course, that presents some issues for the mission as well. It takes 24 hours to send a signal to the spacecraft, and another 24 hours for a response to come back. And so, as we're seeing, we continue to have onboard anomalies on Voyager 1, and it takes a while to try and solve them and bring the spacecraft back online. But I think about that as, I actually think it's really hopeful that we can build something that could be so long-lived. As you were saying, Voyager is going to outlive the Earth and the Sun, and certainly us. People have done studies, simulations, models, looking at what's going to happen to the spacecraft as they're moving through the galaxy. What kinds of rates of degradation are we expecting over time? And in a certain percentage of those simulations, you find that the Voyager spacecraft actually survive long enough to witness the collision of the Milky Way and the Andromeda Galaxy. And so if you think about that, it's like these are, in a very real sense, perhaps going to be some of humankind's longest-lived technosignatures, those things that we're looking for with the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. They could be that. They're going to survive for billions of years. And I think that's a statement of hope, as well as it is a statement of how great we are at doing engineering projects.
And Anne, I feel like you and Carl found a similar kind of, hope or beauty in the idea of the smallness of Earth, in the vastness of the universe. I think about, that great image of the Earth in the beam of light that Carl used to make the point that all of history, everyone who's ever lived and died has lived in this small speck of dust in the universe. I mean, do you still think of it that way? Has your thinking changed, or are you still
more
in love
than
with
ever.
that idea? Yeah.
No, Matt, more than ever. The pale blue dot, it always comes down to this for me. The Apollo landings are not even 12 years after Sputnik. Sputnik, a simple radio transmitter, that's all it was. First thing that our species was ever able to put into orbit, to leave this planet. And then 12 years later, we are capable of sending humans to the moon and bringing them back safely. And then from 1957 to 1977, 20 years, we're able to mount an interstellar mission that not only gives us our first reconnaissance of the outer solar system, of these amazing worlds and their moons, discovers underground oceans and volcanoes and moons that we didn't even know were there. And then as it's leaving the Earth, a moment ago you had a slide of Voyager discovering the heliopause, because these two Voyagers go in different directions, and in very simple geometry, they're able to determine the shape of the solar system as it moves through the galaxy. We are so clever and so stupid, and it's really amazing, and that's what I just keep thinking about all the time. I think about Carl, and I think about his starting in 1981, pleading with NASA to take that picture from out by Neptune, to rise Voyager. Imagine, we're so new at this. We're only 20 years into the space age, and we can send a spacecraft high above the plane from out by the furthest planet that we have explored, rise above the plane of the solar system and look homeward, thanks to Carl, because it took more than 10 years for him to be able to get a yes from NASA, to look back to the family of the sun, to see these planets as they are arrayed around the sun, and to look and find our Earth. You know, it's always seemed to me that the fact that we do science is an indication of some mental health, because we've decided that we are going to adhere to the rules of an ideology which says over and over again to us, it's always whispering in our ear, you might be wrong. And we will reserve the highest rewards for the person who can prove that we are wrong. Because we don't want to be right. We want to know what's really out there, not a projection, not our fears, not our dreams, but nature in all her magnificence as she really is. That's a degree of mental health and courage that I think is what gives me hope about our species. And I am the lucky recipient of email from all over this planet, every country on Earth, about that pale blue dot, about what Carl wrote upon seeing that image and what it meant to him and what it could mean to all of us so that we could live not as sleepwalkers, not as consumers, but as citizens of the cosmos who understand how precious our planet really is.
That was beautiful. Thank you. One of the things I find interesting as a curator of space artifacts, you know, the Voyager probe is in my collection, as is the Pioneer, but you know, one of the best known artifacts, I think, of planetary exploration are these messages. You know, people know the Pioneer plaque, people know about the record, a lot of people know what's on the record. Even if they don't know where the Voyagers went, they know what's on the golden record. You know, why have those resonated so much with people? And, you know, what did your father, Frank Drake, think about the popularity of these things? What did Carl Sagan and what do you, Anne, think about the popularity, the public response to these messages?
I think one of the reasons that they're so resonant, and I'm really curious to hear what you think here too, is that they're mirrors of ourselves, right? And we know as humans that even babies look at their reflections in mirrors and are kind of immediately reaching for it. So there is that time capsule element. Time capsules have been very popular throughout history, and now we just have them in space, which is cool. Cooler, very maybe, cool. Even. So I think that's a big piece of it, is that they do reflect ourselves.
Yeah, when I think of Frank and I think of Carl, I think of two humans who were never about dominance, never, who were just, you know, if they hadn't have been brilliant scientists, I would have nominated them for the Human Hall of Fame as humans, as people. They were so remarkable, so gifted, but at the same time so humble, so completely unpretentious, never speaking to show you how much they knew, always because they wished to communicate and to hear. And I think people love these things because they're not about dominance, they're not about power, they're not about wealth, they're about that passion that is the best thing, I think, within us, the passion to know and to share what is known. And so for me, these artifacts are the first stirrings of, if we do endure as a species, and if we go on to know more about the universe and to even go to some of the places within it, these Frank's and Carl's Pioneer plaque and the Voyager record will be artifacts from the dawn of that wish and that desire. And for me, what is so astonishing about both these men and about the legacy of their lives is how unselfish it was. It was not to make money. It was to know and also to share and to communicate. And I think those impulses are the best in us.
And Nadia, you've spent a good amount of your career as a journalist, as an author, writing about what's happening in space today. What do you see as the legacy of Voyager over the past 50 years in what's come next in space exploration? And what are the next things on the horizon that excite you?
You're going to learn about one of my biases here, which is that I think that the moons in our solar system, especially in the outer solar system, are some of the absolute coolest places to explore. Mostly because I think they're some of the best places to look for life beyond Earth within our solar system today, but also there's just some really weird stuff that's out there. And before Voyager, both of them had left and done the grand tour of the outer planets in the solar system. We didn't know that there were worlds like this out there. The prevailing idea was that everything was kind of cold and sterile, there wasn't much going on. But then once the Voyager probes flew by, took the images like this one that you're looking at of Europa, they revealed what scientists actually described in a publication describing the results as strange new worlds of fire and ice. It was so surprising to them that there could be moons like Europa out there with this global ocean tucked beneath an icy crust, like Io, which is the most volcanic place in the solar system. So I like to think that Voyager colored in our solar system in ways that were totally unexpected and provided a real richness of knowledge, but also a license to imagine what else is out there. And so what I hope the legacy of Voyager will be, and where I hope we're going, is to continue to do projects like that, which we can say are civilization scale science, something that really changes our entire civilization's understanding of our place in the cosmos and what's out there. And there are a couple of those that I'm keeping an eye on right now. One is NASA's Habitable Worlds Observatory, which is going to try and color in what we know of other stellar systems, perhaps in the same way that Voyager did here, by providing us with a lot of information about the worlds that are out there and what they might be like. There's a similar mission that's taking shape in Switzerland called LIFE, also going to be looking for life around earthy planets and other planetary systems. But what I'd really like to see us attempt is an actual purposeful interstellar mission. Right? Voyager was like, it might make it out there. We kind of hope it does. We're not really sure, crossing our fingers. It did. But what would we do if we could actually design a probe that was intended to be interstellar? Where would it go? What would it do? What would we learn from it? Can we color in the galaxy with the same richness of knowledge and imagination as we did for our own solar system?
So in a few minutes, I'm going to turn things over to the audience questions that I have here on the iPad. So again, I remind you to put your questions in the chat if you're watching online, or use the QR code that's not up right now but can be put up in a moment if you're in the audience here in person and want to submit a question. I will then get these on the iPad and we'll ask the questions to our guests. But I wanted to have one last question about imagination. And Anne, I wanted to ask you in particular about the science fiction project that you and Carl embarked on with the novel and then the film Contact. What was it that sort of led to that? Why did it seem important to use science fiction to imagine something that hadn't happened yet, but I guess you could say was sort of the goal of SETI and of the search for life and intelligence in the universe?
Well, Carl had a vast knowledge of science fiction, much greater than mine, and he'd always wanted to try his hand at it. We had just finished writing Cosmos, A Personal Voyage, the first Cosmos, and at that time, it was very common for people to say, well, women can't be as smart as men, because if women were as smart as men, where are the female Leonardos? And that really got me mad. And that prompted the story of Hypatia, which was in the first Cosmos series, this great mathematician, philosopher, the last light of the great library of Alexandria before it was destroyed. And because she was the most famous intellectual in this great city of the world, she was carved to bits with abalone shells by a mob, and who did not like the idea of a woman doing these things. So Carl and I would talk a lot about, wouldn't it be great to create an Odyssey in which a woman gets to go on the trip and the men stay home? And that was exactly how it all started. And we were still living in California after writing Cosmos, and we began to work on this story of what it would be like. Carl really wanted to write a work of science fiction which got the science right. It really irked him that we would go to science fiction movies, some of which were wonderful, and he would walk out afterwards and say, they couldn't have hired a graduate student? I mean, who works cheaper than a graduate student? It's a $75 million movie in those days, and they couldn't hire one person who knew the science and could help them get it right. And so that was the genesis of Contact. We wanted to write a story in which not only the science of that time that was known was correct, but it also had the excitement and the suspense and the jeopardy of a great work of fiction. And that was the genesis of it. And we were so lucky to have the great Jodie Foster bring our character to life. That was a complete stroke of great luck. And so that was the genesis of Contact.
And it's still a wonderful film.
Thank you.
It's aged very well. Not that it's that old, but yeah. So turning now to audience questions. This first one, I think, is a little bit for both of you. So I think the first part for Nadia. So first of all, how did your father determine a way to communicate visually with aliens that wouldn't know our language? So all of the iconography that's on the postcard and then on the cover of the Golden Record. And then for Anne, then once you decide to put audio of languages and of music, what is it that you expect these aliens to be able to understand, or what would they make of all of these sounds?
Yeah, it's tricky, right? I like to ask folks, if you were going to write a message to aliens, A, what would it say? And then B, how would you say it? Because we don't know of any aliens that speak any of the languages that we're familiar with. And so you have to think about, what are the very most basic things that we all share? And one of the most basic is math, right? So it's the language of mathematics. So as an example here, mathematics and science, I'll use the pulsar map, which you're looking at. It's that asterisk-y looking thing, 14-legged spider, whatever you want to call it. The decoder for that, as I mentioned, is actually quantum mechanics. It's those two circles up above. And what those represent is a hydrogen atom. There's one proton, there's one electron. And electrons have a property called spin. We know that from quantum mechanics. They can be spin up or spin down. And when the electron is changing that spin, going from a higher energy state to a lower energy state, it emits a photon of a particular frequency and wavelength. And that is how Dad actually coded the pulsar map, is using that emitted photon, that frequency, that wavelength as the decoder. So he's explaining all of this in the language of physics, and again, reasoning that any extraterrestrial civilization that can intercept a spacecraft is going to be probably pretty good at astronomy. They're probably going to know about this hydrogen spin flip transition because they're studying hydrogen gas in the galaxy. And then thinking about it like that. So binary numbers are really common in all of the work that Dad and Carl did. They use those a lot. But really just thinking about the basics and how to represent images in a way that's going to be as unambiguous as possible for whomever is receiving them.
What a great answer, Nadia. And the spin flip of the hydrogen atom also tells you at what speed to play the record, which is so brilliant. I mean, just brilliant. And I'd like to add that we included a stylus and a needle to play the record. People always sort of bump on that. They're like, well, how are they going to play the record? They don't have a record player. But in fact, we sent one on Voyager. And as you'll see on the cover, you can recognize not only the record, but the stylus on the record. And then, as brilliantly explained by Nadia, the hydrogen atom, once again, Frank's inspired pulsar map. And I'm sorry, I don't have my distance glasses on. I'm forgetting some of the stuff. But you can see the record from above, and then you can see the record from the side. And, that's pretty much, if there's clever enough, as Nadia said, to be spacefaring extraterrestrials, then we got to give them some credit. They've already figured out the hardest part. And of course, when you play the record successfully, when you put the needle stylus on the record, the first thing you see is a perfect circle. And that circle tells you, pay dirt, you're on the right track, and then that's followed by all these images and music and greetings and sounds.
We have one question about a specific track on the record.
Oh, great.
How did you decide to include the Georgian song
Chakrulo?
Yes.
Oh, may I say, I have gotten more love from the country of Georgia than virtually any place else. It's just been amazing. So that was, okay, so we knew we wanted to include something from what was then the Soviet Union to, a little doffing of the hat to another country. And the Russians bombarded us with messages saying that we should include this, what was in my view, a kind of not great pop tune called Midnight in Moscow, which had been a huge success in Europe. And they were like, it's happening, it's great, how could you not want this? And we didn't want to. So I had gone to see Alan Lomax, one of the great figures in music. It's really, we owe Alan Lomax and his father, Don Lomax, a huge debt, because it was them working largely on funds from Roosevelt's Works Project Administration that they went into the South and they rescued the genius of Delta blues that, as far as we know, in that environment might have been lost to us forever. They had a recorder in the back of their jalopy, and they would sit, Blind Willie Johnson and some of the immortal greats of that period who, needless to say, received absolutely no encouragement or support from their fellow humans in that part of the world. And it was only because of their act of remembrance, of knowing what to value, knowing what to cherish, that we have this great music. So went to see Alan Lomax, apartment up town in New York, unbelievable, rabbit warren of 100,000 records. Just astonishing. And I have to say that as much admiration as I have for the great Alan Lomax, he was not happy to see me. He was expecting that they would send a man, and he told me that. And he never even looked at me when he was talking to me. He was so put off by the fact that this young woman had come to see him. But anyway, he started putting music on the record player. And one of the songs that he played, I mean, everything he played was magnificent, but one of the songs he played was Chakrulo, this Georgian men's chant, which comes from the depths of all these men singing. It's just them singing, but you feel like they have a whole orchestra inside them. And loved the song, knew it was perfect, but what were they really saying? So we went to great lengths to find out a translation, and to our delight and amusement, the words were, "Let's kill the landlord." We hate the landlord. Let's kill the landlord. Let's kill the damn landlord, okay? And we just thought, we looked at each other and we said, okay, this is not what we're expecting, but it's great. It's human, it's real, it's definitely a reflection of everyone's experience. And so let's go with it, and we did. And we kept getting these messages. What? No midnight in Moscow? Like, what's wrong with you? But to this day, in fact, there's a magnificent statue of Voyager in Georgia. And it's just amazing how much this has meant to the people of Georgia, and that was a great source of gratification to all of us.
It seems like on a fairly regular basis, we have sort of scary headlines that say that Voyager's not communicating anymore.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Nadia, maybe you've written some of those headlines.
No, she would never.
Not the headlines,
No,
just
Not
the
the
stories.
headlines, just the stories. Okay, yeah, that's right. Journalists don't get to write their own headlines.
Never.
The spacecraft itself may last for billions of years, but it won't be sending signals forever.
No.
When do you expect that we might stop hearing from it? For example, when will its radioisotope thermoelectric generator stop pumping enough power? And when that happens, how do you think we as a culture will react to that loss?
I was going to ask, what's your best guess for when they fall silent?
I think we've got a couple of more years, but remember, these spacecraft were built to last 10 or perhaps 12 years. And we're 50 years on. And that's one of the things that I would love to change. What about the engineers who built these spacecraft, who did it essentially with transistor technology from the mid-1970s? And they built something that, it's only about a year ago, I think it was Voyager 2, that it was decided, maybe it was Voyager 1, they decided to fire a thruster that hadn't been fired since 1985, something like that. And they sent the message almost to light day, not quite. And this spacecraft, as soon as the spacecraft received the message, it executed the command. Imagine that you have a car in your garage that you haven't started since 1985, and you want to go in there and use a key, because then we use keys, and start it up. And as soon as you step on the gas, it just immediately fires up. What would you think of that technology? Those engineers, I can think of Charlie Kohlhase and a couple of other names. What they should be, when we wonder why our kids don't want to learn difficult things that require a tremendous amount of application, and so that they can do these kinds of things, we should remember that as soon as the Voyager mission was over, the engineers were essentially let go. And yet they created something that is thrilling us 50 years later. Just a work of consummate genius and dedication and discipline, really amazing.
So I think the RTGs are going to be okay for more than a few years.
More than a few years?
Let's make a bet. Just kidding. No, so that's what I've heard. But the big questions here are things like the sporadic loss of comms, and that can happen because you get bits that are flipped within the spacecraft's onboard computer, if you want to call it that. And that's what happened a couple of years ago that was actually really scary, and it was hard to come back from. And so it could be entirely possible that you have a spacecraft out there that's still running. It's still warm enough for some of the instruments to run, but you just have no way to talk to it. And that's what we've experienced with Voyager 1 a couple of times in the last few years. So yeah, I think your question about what will be the cultural impact of losing these spacecraft, of when they go quiet, that's one that I think about a lot. Because for so many of us, the Voyagers are so significant and resonant, and their legacy is humongous. And so what will it be like when the skies are silent and we're no longer hearing from them? I don't know that answer. I think it may be unknowable until it happens.
I have thought about this quite a bit, and how I will feel, because this story began for me when I was 27, and now I'm 76. And so I think about that a lot. Like, how will I feel when the Voyagers are not reporting back to JPL on a regular basis? And I think it's the way I feel about my children, which is that, I ached when they left home, but I'm so delighted and thrilled that they are independent beings who are in the universe, making their own great story. And I think that's how I hope I'll feel about the Voyagers letting go and imagining what their fates may be. It's a magnificent prospect.
There have been a lot of other messages sent into space, a lot of microchips filled with people's names who sign on to missions. There was recently a wonderful poem by the poet laureate Ada Limon included on Europa Clipper. If you were going to create a Voyager record today, let's not go into everything you'd put on it, but what would be maybe your top thing that would represent culture today that you would want to put on that message for both of you?
I'm going to punt a little bit and say that I think if we were creating a Voyager record today, I don't think it would be done in the same way. I don't think it would be such a small team. And so my punt for this one is I don't think it would be up to me. I would actually be a lot more interested in learning from all of you what you would like to put on there and what would be meaningful.
I think what I would do today, let me go back for a second and say that there was only one thing that we were not allowed to include on the Voyager record. And that was, we had a magnificent photo of a human couple, frontally naked. The woman was 4 or 5 months pregnant. They were both frontally naked, and the way we'd planned it was that you'd see this image, which was, in my view, a beautiful one. And then the following images were overlays of the fetus within her and a little bit about human biology. Well, a member of Congress heard about this and stood on the floor of the House and said, NASA to send smut to the stars. And Carl and I were really upset. And the great John Cassani at NASA, who was in all things a force for good, but it was his onerous duty to deliver the news to us that NASA absolutely said, no naked people, no. And at that moment, I realized how much we hate ourselves. How much we hate ourselves, how ashamed we are of ourselves, of our human natural selves. And so my answer would be, I would not curate a new Voyager message. I would send the whole World Wide Web. And I would say, this is who we are. Good, for good and for ill. No, all of it. I would say all of it. I would say the greatest works of literature, of architecture, of art, of culture, of music, and the less great things. But just because all of it is, is part of our human selves, and the idea of standing naked before the universe is, this is who we are, for better or for worse. And maybe there would be some very compassionate, far-seeing, highly evolved extraterrestrial who would appreciate that candor. I don't know, but I'm just saying, why curate? Why be a gatekeeper? Why not let it all hang out? And you can, it would be the most scientific way anyway to do it.
Well, thank you both, Anne and Nadia, for being with us here tonight. You've been wonderful. Let's have a hand for our guests. Thank you. Our next Exploring Space lecture, Human and Robots on Other Worlds, is going to take place on April 23rd. Registration is open now if you want to reserve your tickets. Stargazing is going to take place outside over by Delta Solar, so just head out the Independence Avenue exit and walk towards 7th Street. Our astronomy team will be waiting for you if you want to gaze at the stars tonight. And we always want to hear from you. If you could take a few minutes to complete our lecture survey, we would really appreciate that. And thank you again for coming. Thank you again to our sponsors, and we hope you'll all join us again for a future Exploring Space lecture, maybe in April, maybe the next month, whenever you want to come out. It's been a pleasure having you. Please, I hope you had a great time. Come back again.